Good afternoon, everybody. It's really great to see you here. My name is Mary Foskett. I direct the Humanities Institute, and it's my privilege this afternoon to introduce our colleague and my friend, Dr. Corey Walker, who will be delivering this afternoon's lecture, Fifeville and the Fate of the Humanities. Corey D.B. Walker is Dean of the College of Arts, Sciences, Business, and Education, and John W. and Anna Hodgkin Haynes Professor of the Humanities at Winston-Salem State University. A scholar of African American social, political, and religious thought, Dr. Walker has published broadly on the history of African American political thought and culture, African American religious thought, and religion and public life. He's the author of The Freemasonry of the Race, African American Freemasonry and the Struggle for Democracy in America, and has completed the manuscript for his current book project entitled Between Transcendence and History, an essay on religion and the future of democracy in America. He's also editor of the special issue of the journal Political Theology on Theology and Democratic Futures, and associate editor of the award-winning Sage Encyclopedia of Identity. His articles and essays have appeared in such journals as Callaloo, Journal of the American Academy of Religion, and South Atlantic Quarterly, among others. If that doesn't make him busy enough, Dr. Walker has long been involved in civic affairs and organizations. Just a sampling of his civic involvement includes his serving as a champion of the Winston-Salem Community Innovation Lab, as a member of the board of directors for both the Southeastern Center for Contemporary Art and the River Run International Film Festival, and as a member of the National Advisory Board of the Middle Passage Ceremonies and Port Markers Project. He's appeared on a variety of radio and television shows, you may have come across him, and has served as guest commentator for a number of media outlets in the U.S. and abroad. Last fall, the Humanities Institute had the pleasure of hosting Dr. Walker as one of the panelists at our Humanities for Our Future event, a gathering of local educators and cultural leaders for a panel discussion and open dialogue about the future of humanities education. We're delighted to welcome him back to our campus this afternoon. And this talk is sponsored by the ZSR Library Lecture Series, thanks to the library, and co-sponsored by the Humanities Institute. So today, Dr. Walker will be speaking about the humanities in relation to the documentary film Fifeville that he co-directed and co-produced in 2005 with acclaimed artist and filmmaker Kevin Jerome Everson. The film is an exploration of economic change and the evolving identity of Fifeville, a neighborhood in Charlottesville, Virginia. It focuses on the details, gestures, and material life of the citizens of Fifeville as they communicate their understandings of the neighborhood's changing landscape and experience the impacts of gentrification. I think we're going to begin by seeing that this afternoon, right?
Well, a little.
Okay,
a little bit,
that's a snippet of it.
Yeah.
So we're excited and glad to have you. Always great to have you on campus. So please join me in welcoming Dean Walker. Thank you. Love having you.
Oh, it's always great to come over to Wake Forest. Since I've come and landed in Winston-Salem 2 years ago, the folks over here at Wake Forest have been a wonderful community, along with my colleagues at Winston-Salem State. It really shows the vibrancy, the vitality of intellectual life in North Carolina in general, but more particular in Winston-Salem. This is a very unique space. And thank you, Mary, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to the Z. Smith Reynolds Library here for hosting me. Thanks, Joy, for all of the conversation. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Brad, for working on everything in the back. And I want to thank my colleagues here at Wake, particularly Derek. Derek Hicks, a longtime colleague and collaborator, for coming out today. What I'd like to do is sort of set the stage for Fifeville. It is now 10 years after screening Fifeville, after we first made it, Kevin and I, while we both served on the faculty at the University of Virginia. And it gives an opportunity to begin to reflect on what that film meant and where my thinking was. And in many ways, what I'll offer is an itinerary of thought right now. In the early 2000s, I was preoccupied with a series of questions around how we think, around how we act, and about new possibilities for American democracy. That led me to write my first book on African American Freemasons and the struggle for democracy in America, where I began to look at how we can think through cultural formations to actually develop new forms of democratic theory. That book gave rise to a series of questions. These questions such as, how does thought and the project of thinking, critical and otherwise, bracket and arrest conceptions of the human? And tracking these African American Freemasons from the early period of the early Republic up through the late 19th century, I was amazed at how the conceptions and vocabularies that we have impoverish the very worlds in which these individuals inhabited, how they began to conceive of new democratic possibilities, how they begin to conceive of themselves as humans, and develop alternative arrangements for social and community belonging. So that question really crystallized as a result of just looking at minute books and looking at handwriting and looking at material culture and looking at graveyards and thinking through spatial logics of how individuals organize space and organize the everyday. That question led into another question. How and in what ways do legitimate knowledges violently abstract the historical and material conditions of existence? That question really crystallized for me when Walter Mignolo and I were collaborating. At the time, I was director of the Center for the Study of Local Knowledge, and Walter was still based at Duke University at the Center for Global Humanities. And we were traveling through Buenos Aires. And it was there where I delivered a lecture on local knowledge and human interest that was inspired by a series of conversations with Jürgen Habermas on the question of knowledge and human interest. And I wanted us to begin to think, what happens if we don't think of knowledge as this universal formation that's always already apparent through our pre-existing categories of thought, but instead indigenize those forms of knowledge and then look at the abstractions that occur in the everyday. I had a wonderful opportunity to collaborate with colleagues across the arts and sciences, architecture, across law, as well as across engineering. And it was really in engineering where certain ideas crystallized. It was with Garrick Louis, an engineer at the University of Virginia, who stated, you know, Corey, he was a fellow in the center, and he said, you know what, Corey, I've always worked with communities. And in building and designing clean water systems, I wanted to work with communities to then leverage those clean water systems to make them sustainable and to make their presence felt within those frameworks. And I never had a concept for it. But the concept of Clifford Geertz's local knowledge really fit what we were doing. But then he said, but there's something else that escapes the concept. And I said, this is what we're after. In many ways, we're just chasing this idea of this elusive framework that we gesture toward. We may get a glimpse of it, maybe in Clifford Geertz's work, maybe in our collaborations, but we're always striving toward more. So that second question continued to stay with me. The third question, is it possible that our dominant forms of knowing facilitate dehumanization by design? And that dehumanization by design comes from a critical colleague who really understands that if we're thinking in the ways in which we think and how we language and word the world, we can actually miss the newness, the freshness of the everyday. And that dehumanization by design, I said, perhaps consciously and unconsciously, the ways in which we're thinking about the humanities, this construct, this idea, this formation, this field of knowledge is not providing us with a broader humanities. The crisis of the humanities may not be a crisis of the moment, may not be due to the logics of the political economy of education in the developed world. It may be constitutive of the dominant forms of knowing, such that the humanities by design, by their institutionalization, their legitimation, the reinforcement of them, the categorical thinking and the categorical logic of their formation may dehumanize us, and we may then continually find ourselves repeating the crisis of the humanities. These questions serve as a backdrop for us to begin to think about what it is that we attempted to do with Fifeville. And as I look back on it, I was sitting in C.G. O'Kelly Library on the campus of Winston-Salem State University. And when you walk in the C.G. O'Kelly Library, you have these two amazing murals by John Biggers, three stories high, Origins and Ascension. And it was these murals, I'm sitting there contemplating Biggers, thinking of Biggers, and I wrote a sketch of a particular article that I want to pursue, Biggers in the Bauhaus, looking at his time at Hampton and at Penn State that I'm so interested in. But it was John Biggers who made this statement in 1995 about the passage of time. I realized that the passage of time makes a difference in how things look. In many ways, a decade after Fifeville, it is only now that I'm realizing what we were attempting to do. And I tell Kevin all the time, we keep screening Fifeville. Fifeville is gone back to Paris last year. It's continuing to screen this year. And we're always wondering, from the first screening at Oberhausen in 2005 to its latest screening in Europe, how does this film continue to resonate? We're wondering that. And for us, it's a series of questions that we're after. And in many ways, what Bigger states up here, the passage of time, it is through looking at Fifeville that now I realize what we were after. And it is why this manuscript, Between Transcendence and History, has taken such a long gestation. Because I published all of these essays, but I still did not crack the idea that I was tracking. So now let's screen Fifeville. It's about 14 minutes. And after the screening of Fifeville, I'll give you an itinerary of where my thinking is relative to Fifeville, and it'll open up some possibilities for us for a conversation afterwards. All right?
Who's ready?
Yeah.
Hey, Diane, you're not.
Roll sound.
Can you see?
Camera. Let's get to it.
I don't know if I want to say this is the new Fifeville, but I relocated here in 1996. Oops.
Yeah. Roll sound.
Get the boom light back. Camera.
We're ready. Lots of construction, lots of construction.
Hello, my name is Della Dooms. I'm a member of the Charlottesville Fifeville area, and I've been here all my life. And all the changes and things that going about in the Fifeville neighborhood, it's good in a way, but then again, it's bad. Sometimes I feel like that we are taken away from our people. A lot of people in this area I know, and I want them to have everything that their ancestors used to have here. And I know this is where the big change coming in when we see our homes go away from us and our families are away from one another now. The neighborhood is not the same. People are very different now. You're not friendly as we used to be. We just, it's a big change here. And I just don't know how we can get it back or what could we do to make the neighborhood better, to keep the streets clean, to give one another respect. It's just a lot of things that need to be issued here in the Fifeville area.
Cut.
I grew up here and relocated. We moved here in 1950. Went to high school here and relocated and went to college in New Jersey. And I stayed in New York, New Jersey till '96. When I came back, personally, I liked the changes I saw. In comparison to the smaller cities I used to see in the Northeast, Charlottesville, Fifeville in particular, has really maintained its value, its look. Even though the trees are disappearing, it's maintained its value and its look. That's why I say when I see construction like this, it's a plus. Mainly in this Fifeville area, we had a lot of rehabbing of the old houses, the older houses, rehabbing for sale. And I don't want to call it gentrification. I call it an improvement, because I would rather see, coming from New York, New Jersey, I would rather see a house rehabbed for ownership as opposed to being leveled and making it an empty lot. Obviously, the university has done a lot of construction down here. As a matter of fact, you can hear the construction going on now.
During the time when Charlottesville was segregated, this gray building right here used to be a store, black owned. The red building was also a store that was black owned. This is also the neighborhood where Sally Hemings lived. You know where the Hampton Inn is? Huh? She's buried somewhere on that property, or close to that property. This house sold for $200,000. A 2-bedroom house.
2 bedroom?
2 bedrooms. Can you imagine that?
How much is that?
$200,000. In Charlottesville in the 50s and the 60s, most of your small neighborhoods had their own grocery stores, butcher shop, etc., etc. Directly in front of you is Tunstall Park. Tunstall Park was land that was donated by a black family, and it became the Black Park during segregation. This used to be a hospital, or part of a hospital. He's a black entrepreneur. Beauty shop, black business.
I was born in this neighborhood 51 years ago. And as you can see, with all the new construction, the new renovations, it's all changed, and really that's what life's about to me. I can remember this neighborhood was completely segregated at one time, approximately 20, 30 years ago. And as you can see, there's more integration. From Fifeville, from here to Ridge Street was all black, and all on the other side of Ridge was all white. We didn't intermingle when I was a young kid, but now, as changes in life and changes in society have been made, we are experiencing at this time a lot of rebuilding of the neighborhood. This was a major crack neighborhood at one time, this whole corner, the next corner, and all that's gone. At one time, you would see nothing but police when you came down here, but a lot of people in the street doing any and everything. But as you can see, the necessary changes have been made. The project behind me, I think it started approximately 2 years ago, and due to the weather and what have you, they finally getting to what I can see at the end of it. But man, it was a time when all the dump trucks and construction trucks and traffic was like my alarm clock in the morning. I can always tell when they started working because the trucks would start up, and they're right in my backyard. Every morning, since then, it's been the same thing. They're still my alarm clock today. But I'm sure they have to do what they have to do. There's no other way to do it. And so we have a new project here, the whole neighborhood being revitalized. It just makes for a better neighborhood, in my opinion. I mean, there's a lot to be seen, but time will tell like anything else.
Sound?
Camera.
Oh, go ahead and talk. Oh, with people buying more homes and they fixing up these houses and people buying more homes now, I think that's a good start. I ain't think of nothing else.
It's fine.
Everyone's good?
Camera. All right, move it. All right, move it.
Action.
UVA bought it, trying to buy out everybody's property, and we had 2 trailers over here. They bought them out, UVA bought them out, and they're gonna make this a parking lot. We thought it was gonna be like 2 big buildings or 1 big building. It's about 5, 6, 7 buildings in there, and they still building a couple more. We had no idea that was going to happen. It's been pretty messy since they've been doing the construction work to it. You know, you can see our houses and our cars, everything is all dusty and everything. But the main problem is that we do need some housing for community, for our community. You know, I just don't know how this is going to work. But it's a lot more peaceful and quiet now. So that's about it. That's what I got to say.
Well, I think that, you know, it's a lot of construction going on where they was trying to keep wildlife and, you know, instead of growing, so they have to make a choice between wildlife and being a city, you know what I'm saying? Just like last year, they got bears running right out here and, you know, because they don't have nowhere to live. I'm just saying, I mean, you know, the wildlife and you know, the population of people, so they're gonna have to decide which one should come first. Me personally, I think people.
The neighborhood is finished. Is it on?
Yes, sir.
All right, our neighborhood is finished. It's not the same. All the old people gone. Everybody buying up our neighborhood, selling to the universe. Next couple of years from down the line from there, this shit gonna be gone. That's all I got to say.
I mean, if y'all see a difference, you know what I'm saying? I don't know.
Better than we do.
Yeah.
This ain't your first time, y'all.
Yeah, if you ain't been here in a long time, you probably would know. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it's the same, you know. Well, it's the same. That's all I have to say.
Everybody just lay back now, you know. Enjoy life. That's it, and that's all.
we see some residents of that Fifth Street area in Fifeville are absolutely amazing. And just sitting here watching it again and thinking of the Biggers quote, it really opens up some new opportunities for us. Briefly, the film was shot over a series of 4 weekends, and we shot it with our students at the University of Virginia. And I used to be a prison chaplain in Charlottesville, and some of the residents remember me not from being with the University of Virginia, but with the Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Jail. So some of them didn't appear on screen, but what they did offer was some of those silent shots and some of those voiceovers. And we wanted to be very intentional in creating this film. This was an art object. I mean, working with Kevin, Kevin is an artist. He works through the medium of film. Kevin is preoccupied with form. And we were inspired by 3 artists. James Van Der Zee, when you look at all of the Harlem Renaissance photos, you're always amazed at James Van Der Zee and how he constructs and how he frames objects. We spent an afternoon, Kevin introduced me to August Sanders, the German photographer around the turn of the 20th century, who photographed German peasant life in the countryside. And we were sitting, I remember us sitting in the library just going through these awesome and amazing portraits when you look at people dressing up going somewhere. And Fiona Tan, the Indonesian filmmaker and artist, and her portraiture. So throughout the film, what you see are almost a series of portraits. And we're very interested in the ways in which people move, how they act, their gestures. The one individual on the film who talked about, he was 51 years old and saw how the neighborhood has changed. We were preoccupied with his hands, the way his hands moved and the way in which he told stories. There was one point where you could just cut out all sound, focus on the hands, and just move into a whole new world. And of course, the knowledge that was just flowing out of the film. The knowledge about political economy, the knowledge about space, the knowledge about history, the ways in which bodies embody memory, the ways in which you think about the movements and logics of institutions, the way in which individuals in the everyday construct these ornate worlds of meaning. And yet that's lost on us. And in many ways, we wanted this. The strangest thing that we've had to deal with is that this film, Fifeville, is a documentary. We intentionally wanted to break that. That's why everything is framed, and we foreground the very constructed nature of it. And then we throw in those bits of whimsy and of imagination with the cat. I mean, where else you find a cat in the everyday? It's like, oh, okay. But do we pay attention to it? And we wanted to pay attention to the whimsy, the fantasy, the realms of imagination that leap, open up a new aesthetic register of how do we understand this film, particularly films about African Americans, because the racial logics that we have tend to freeze and arrest black bodies to the biographical. So we can never see the art and the aesthetic. So what we did with Fifeville, interestingly enough, draws me to another film, a film on the humanities. An opportunity last year we had to discuss the heart of the matter, the report that came out of the Humanities Project nationally that that wants us to rethink and revalue the humanities, but in many ways it remains trapped, and it remains trapped by a question: who will lead America into a bright future? It is this question that is so emblematic of this trapping and arresting of the development of new possibilities of humanistic knowledge in our world today. And in many ways, it's this film with Yo-Yo Ma, Sandra Day O'Connor, and others who are really talking about the humanities in an almost classical, almost reified sense, that the humanities travel unreconstructed, unencumbered across space and time, that Fifeville strives against, and the way in which our thinking around Fifeville strives against. And it is the thought of a really enigmatic figure, one of the giants in American intellectual thought, in African American intellectual thought and in religious and critical theory, Charles H. Long raises this question in a moment in the mid-1980s. He raises this question in a series of conversations and dialogues with his colleagues at the University of Chicago, with the late Nathan Scott, who I had a wonderful opportunity to spend an enigmatic year with, reading Heidegger, and while he smoked Winston's in the red, out of the red box, and curled cigarette smoke around my head and just curled my brain. And at times I was thinking, is it the smoke or is it just the thought? But really, Charles Long really crystallized the question for us. And it is the question, should the humanities, is it adequate for the humanities to derive its fundamental? And notice, Long isn't saying we jettison the humanities as conceived. He's saying the foundation of the humanities. Is this adequate that we have it or conceive of the humanities simply from the Hebraic, Greek, and Christian meanings of our culture? And if you look at the film, The Heart of the Matter, you see that foundation reaffirmed. And it becomes the dominant foundation. Thus, it is that dominant foundation that's then wedded to possibilities of the humanities as a particular nationalist project that then continues on the project of the nation state, but then eclipses the worlds of possibility for our students, for us, for scholars, to then go out and engage the world and think through a Fifeville or think through the lens of someone else. And so with Charles Long guiding us, now I'm looking at a conversation and writing about a conversation. And it's a conversation around Get Aboard the Bandwagon, the 1953 Fred Astaire film. And really it's a conversation between Stanley Cavell, who's written on this film tremendously, who's used it as an itinerary of thought in his American Philosophical Association presidential lecture of '96, along with his Spinoza lectures. And Cavell is amazing in the way in which he's reading film, looking at the possibilities of unleashing the aesthetic imagination, trying to think through new regimes of thought in response to the question of skepticism. But it is Cavell's thought that is amended by Robert Gooding Williams, who reads Cavell, reading Fred Astaire, reading America, reading knowledge, reading race. And it is the conversation between Stanley Cavell and Robert Gooding Williams that gestures toward another possibility, but really can't harness the thought that's going on not only in the Fred Astaire film, but how we begin to raise the question and formulate the project of thinking itself. And it is at the end of Robert Gooding Williams' great essay on Cavell and Fred Astaire, where Fred Astaire receives his meaning, the character in the film receives his meaning of dance in and through a dance with an African-American shoeshine, bootlick character, and also through the through an amusement, an arcade, an amusement park. Robert Gooding Williams then says, is it enough for philosophy to begin to think of itself purely through an Emersonian lens, to try to recapture a reign of thought beyond what we conceive of philosophy in its analytic mode in our contemporary manner? How can it then understand the ordinary? But Gooding Williams is still almost arrested by the very categories of thought, because it is still within those dominant logics of philosophy proper. And it is here where this 1953 film that announces Fred Astaire's return to the stage and to the film, that I'm juxtaposing a little book by Howard Thurman, his 1947 Ingersoll Lectures on Immortality, delivered at Harvard Divinity School in April of 1947. And it is Howard Thurman moving to the space of the Negro spirituals. The way in which Cavell wants to confront skepticism in and through art, in and through opera, in and through film, to open up the reign of possibility for thinking proper. I would argue that it is the exemplary articulation of this in and through Howard Thurman's Negro Spiritual Speaks of Life and Death. It is there where Thurman confronts the everydayness of African American existence, the ultimate skeptics who affirm life and abundant forms of life when there are no rational resources to begin to affirm life itself. It is here where Thurman begins to reconceive of time. He reconceives of the everyday in and through the space of the Negro spiritual, and begins to hint at the atonality of the Negro spirituals as this creative space of new forms of existence. It's an essay I've written that came out in a book on race and political theology that I revisited, and I said, you know what? I got it wrong in this essay. It is only beginning to think Howard Thurman with the resources by the conversation of Stanley Cavell and Robert Gooding Williams, where I understand anew the depth at which Thurman is trying to re-articulate the project of thought and of human existence. And it is a question that's preoccupying a series of thinkers in mid-20th century America who are looking at what are the possibilities of human existence, particularly after World War II, after the atomic bomb, and also with the eruption and decolonization of the Third World. But once again, I move to Charles Long, because Long reminds us that their categories are not participating in what we call the slash, you see. That arena in which things are changed and move around, that transcultural meaning of things. In many ways, what I'm now preoccupied with is putting these ideas together and thinking this slash. It is not the products in and of themselves that we're preoccupied with. It's not even Fifeville itself. It is trying to figure out the slashes, the ellipses, the silences. How do we language that? How do we word that? How do we give life to that? How do we give expression to it? And then how do we thematize it for a project of a new humanity? Charles Long again. New questions mean that there must be a new perception and a new experience of ourselves and our world. The basic question is the question of humanity, a new humanity. And here we have a screenshot taken from Isaac Julian's film on Frantz Fanon. And what I did, I wanted to wash out the screenshot so you only get a gesture, a hint of what that image of the individual is. And it is at that moment where, in Isaac Julian's film on Fanon, where Fanon is taking up the mantle from his teacher, Aimé Césaire, on the project of a new humanity, in and through the Algerian experience, in and through the registers of thought of French psychoanalysis, particularly Jacques Lacan, where he begins to revise Lacanian psychoanalytic theory in his 1952 classic Black Skins, White Masks. It is at this moment where I say, this is what this project of thinking is. It is not only to set afoot a new man, it is this idea of a new humanity, and by extension, a pluralization of the humanities. So I find myself in a moment where Theodore Adorno crystallized it best in Minimum Moralia, where he talks about philosophy. And Adorno, of course, is writing this book of aphorisms in a Nietzschean manner, attempting to stave off skepticism, but to also open up new opportunities for thought itself. In many ways, you see an analog for this in the work of the philosophical novelist Wilson Harris, who says we have to open up an other corpus of sensibility. But it is Adorno who gives us the ethic. And it is that ethic that philosophy which can be responsibly practiced in the face of despair, is the attempt to contemplate all things as they would present themselves from the standpoint of redemption. Knowledge has no light but that shed on the world by redemption. All else is reconstruction, mere technique. It is here where I found the title for that book manuscript, Between Transcendence and History. Adorno is gesturing and calling us to a modality of thinking that's not mere reconstruction. It's not mere technique. It is not merely following the formulaic rules and categories of thought that are already in existence. Instead, it is pursuing another path, a path of thinking that where we're almost redesigning it from where we like it to be to where we are today, and then charting a path toward that end that we gesture. It is that humanities that now preoccupies me. And it is that form of the humanities that has enabled me to make sense of my essay. An essay on religion and the future of democracy in America. But most importantly, it has crystallized my thinking for all of my subsequent projects and has given me an opportunity to open up new conversations with dialogue partners here at Wake Forest University, at Winston-Salem State University, across the nation and across the world. And it's something that I share with you today through Fifeville. Thank you. Any questions? Fifeville, the bigger thing, don't worry about all of that. But if you have any questions on Fifeville, I'll be glad to answer them. Great. We captured that, right? We can write that up. Fifeville, how it began, Kevin and I and Claudrina Harrell, these are three dear comrades. I mean, when you talk about intellectual interlocutors, you're really talking about friends. Folks you sit down and think with, and think not in an abstract, disembodied manner, but think with the fullness of who you are. They host me. They welcome me in all of my thoughts, and I welcome them in all of their thoughts, and we're transformed in the process. I was director of the Center for the Study of Local Knowledge, and this was a Ford-funded project around, we were preoccupied, we'd come back from Jena, Germany, Reginald Butler and I. We taught at Friedrich Schiller University, and then after we finished there, we went to Paris, and we were like, what do we do? And while we're in Jena, we were dealing with the legacy of the Holocaust. And when you're situated in Jena, it is amazing of the erasure that happens. There's a former East German side, and of course, history stops at 1928, then it picks back up in the 1960s. And Jena, Friedrich Schiller University was one of the first universities to hire a Nazi race scientist. And of course, it's an area Karl Marx got his doctorate from Jena. Napoleon descended a hill. When you read Hegel's lectures, this is literally what Hegel is talking about. But we were in this space, and we could not figure this space out. We were talking to our colleagues, Jörg Nagler. We were talking to the late Lutz Niethammer, and they were all telling us about this interesting, enigmatic history, but it was with the students. It was one night, the students created a whole dinner for us. And our seminar was held all day. We had this long seminar. And the students started asking us questions around how should they remember their past? How should they wrestle with it? And all of our trips, we went to Buchenwald. And I have a picture, a framed picture in my office of Buchenwald, the memorial at Buchenwald. And I also have a picture of Jefferson's Monticello. And it is between the space of the labor camp and the plantation where thought cannot exist in the same manner. So that's what animates me. And it was going through Buchenwald where you had a zoo right there. And then, of course, Buchenwald was one of the places where the Nazi regime perfected the furnaces that were then used at Auschwitz and other labor camps and concentration camps. And we would ask questions of folks, and we'd say, you know, how did you operate in the everyday with this knowledge? And people would say, well, we didn't know. No one knew. And it was almost this erasure. And we were like, well, how did no one know? I mean, you're burning people. There's a distinct smell. There's a sensory experience around this, that the train depot to Weimar is right there, and it's still in use. And there's only a sign, a plaque in this train station. And understanding that space, thought has to be different. You cannot go on and do the same thing. But how did they do it? How are folks just continuing on? And you know, we go to Weimar, and this bastion of culture, of romanticism, and of thought, and of course of possibility when you think of the Weimar Republic before its eclipse, and then of course National Socialism. You think of all those possibilities, and you're trying to think, well, how do you remember this, but everything is eclipsed? We translated that over to the U.S. I took my parents on Route 5 in Virginia. And of course, in Route 5 in Virginia, they call these plantation tours. And you can stop at these plantation houses. And we're sitting here saying, you know, my mother and father, they're great folks. They ask the very tough questions. And, you know, I'm sitting back just watching, and we're having a picnic. But here are plantation tours where the violence of the everyday, the structured nature of it, that was not only embodied in people walking around, like the people in the film in Fifeville. It's 51 years old, I remember. These memories are embodied. They're here with us. It is what Proust would say, when I enter a room, an entire army enters with me. In many ways, there are armies everywhere around us whenever we have this encounter. And the question for us is, how do we think that? We cannot think it properly. We can't host it with just this narrow conception of the humanities, particularly the way this is institutionalized and disciplined in the North Atlantic Academy. It arrests the possibility of thought itself. It diminishes human experience. It diminishes the very idea of the human. So how do I write all of that? How do I wrestle with all of that and put it on paper? I can't. The philosophical resources I have do not enable me to host it. I go to Heidegger. That's not it. I go to Adorno. Yes, okay, Adorno finds a voice. But it is this radical skeptic in deep Africana thought, W.E.B. Du Bois, who raises it for me. Du Bois in Of the Sorrow Song writes, do the sorrow song sing true? The radically skeptic question that he then goes on to answer in the affirmative, and then he writes that moving elegy of the passing of the firstborn. And then I say, well, Du Bois is trying to arrest thought within a particular framework and a conception, but he's offering me a form, the essay. But it's still not enough. Anna Julia Cooper comes in A Voice from the South, her collection of essays of 1892, she talks about the project of thinking that Richter has brought us to the cold region of thought, where thought dies. Is this the place where we need to be? Is this the place where we are? And she says, no, this is an 1886 speech. So between Du Bois and Anna Julia Cooper, I find the space. But how do I host it? I have to go to Kevin. I say, Kevin, let's do a film. It's like, man. And Kevin has a beautiful way of language, gesture, and you even see it in his emails. He says, yeah, let's do a film. You got some money? And I said, well, you know, I got this center over here. Let's, you know, we can use some money over there. So the biggest thing that we needed, we needed a 16mm camera. Kevin drove down to North Carolina and got it. And then we used the hand crank camera. So you hear it clicking in the film. Because we wanted to play on this question of authenticity, on this question of time, and on temporality, and on memory. So we had to visualize that. So Kevin and I said, okay, where should we go? We're looking around in Charlottesville. There were plenty of places to go. And it was right near the university, right down the street from the University of Virginia, Fifeville. It just erupts. We had a poverty seminar in and around Charlottesville, and we could have did a number of different places, but Fifeville was the area. And we did not want a perfect shoot. It was whoever was out, when we showed up, and if they would talk to us. And the art came in the editing and in the framing of the sequences of people. That's it. So it's not real. We tell folks, they're like, it's real, not real. We don't know. People look at it as documentary because they want to, you know, arrest the thought of, particularly on black people, gentrification. It conjures up this pre-existing imaginary, this pre-existing thought structure that we want to play with. Then we want to say, can you see yourself in this? Can you see a new humanities in this? For me, yes. But it's going to require a deep revision of thought, a deep revision of the very constructs of knowledge and the frameworks that we have. And then after 4 weeks, we start screening it, and it continues. So I really like what you said, so I'm gonna keep that. But that's how Fifeville comes out. It's great in conversation, the way thought works. Thank you. Thank you.
Time for one more question. Have you considered revisiting Fifeville, like you were saying, you're revisiting your essay and the slash between it? Have you, since the time that you filmed it and created it, have you considered it in a different way and would like to revisit it and like you said, you think completely differently about it?
Of course. Not in this manner. When I go back to Charlottesville, I'm still connected with Charlottesville. Some very deep friendships with colleagues at the University of Virginia, with faith communities in and around Charlottesville, but most importantly with fraternal colleagues in and around Charlottesville. And just mailed a long-distance check to Brother Brown to make sure that I'm fraternally financial for the upcoming year. So the connections are quite distinct. And I give you an example. Last time I went to Charlottesville, it had to be 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. And it was to the University of Virginia. And the University of Virginia was commemorating Henry Martin, an African-American who was the bell ringer. And it was the way in which you can commemorate everyone and say, you know, the universities can say we're facing our past and through this celebration of Henry Martin. And with wonderful colleagues, we had B.J. Iyer, we had Greg Tate. It was a wonderful conversation. And the question came when it came to me. I said, I don't want to remember Henry Martin. I don't want to remember a proper name. I don't even know who Henry Martin is. The only way I know Henry Martin are through the archives and catalogs and frameworks and fragments that we have at the university. I say, do we really know Henry Martin? We don't. He's doing a certain amount of intellectual work for the institution. So the question with Fifeville now, you go down Main Street, West Main Street in Charlottesville, absolutely different. And in many ways, you'll see West Haven, a housing area, West Haven, that was deliberately lowered so that individuals wouldn't see it from Main Street, and it was a high area such that if you look at the topography of areas, and you can find it in Winston-Salem, those high areas are where generally you find the more wealthy individuals. The low areas where you find typically African Americans and lower class individuals. So what I need to do now is, if I go back there, it will have to be something different. I went back, and it was relative to Henry Martin because, once again, we were trapped by a logic that, okay, you can do Fifeville, you can speak about this. Let's speak about Henry Martin. And my question is, we don't know Henry Martin. So what I'm asking is, and my good friend Dr. Darrell Aaron over there will know from Jeremiah, from Sam Proctor, how shall they hear? In many ways, we're asking, how shall people think? And I don't know if we can actually think those spaces yet of those people until we get more resources. And I think spaces like here at Wake Forest, these talks at WSSU, I think we're at the avant-garde of trying to create those new spaces.
I want to give you